The city hummed below the rain-slicked windows of Alexander Sterling's penthouse office, a vast, glittering tapestry of ambition and movement that stretched to the horizon. From his unparalleled vantage point 87 floors above the street, Alexander surveyed the empire he had built, Sterling Global, a titan of industry, a testament to his relentless drive and strategic brilliance. He was a figure of immense power, a name synonymous with success, his decisions shaping markets and influencing economies. He commanded respect, inspired awe, and, in some circles, instilled fear. Yet, in the quiet hours after the last deal was closed and the last email sent, when the city lights seemed to mock his solitude, a familiar, persistent ache settled in his chest. A hollow space, vast and cold, that no amount of wealth or power could ever truly fill. It had been 5 years, 2 months, and 17 days since Alara Vance had walked out of his life. He knew the number, even though he rarely allowed himself to dwell on the precise count, a silent testament to the indelible mark she had left. They were, by all accounts, an improbable pairing. He, the driven, emotionally guarded billionaire, tethered to the relentless schedule of global finance. She, the vibrant, unpredictable artist, living a life guided by inspiration and the pursuit of beauty. They had met at an exhibition in a trendy, slightly grimy gallery downtown, a world away from the polished elegance of his usual haunts. He had attended out of a sense of obligation to a client who was a patron of the arts, but he stayed, utterly captivated by a large, abstract piece pulsating with color and raw emotion. He had asked about the artist, and across the crowded room, his eyes had found hers. She had a presence, an energy that drew him in, a refusal to be anything other than authentically herself, a stark contrast to the carefully curated personas he encountered daily. Their love affair had been a whirlwind, intense and all-consuming, a vibrant splash of color in his otherwise monochromatic existence. She saw past the Sterling name, the public image, the immense wealth, to the man beneath, the boy who had built walls around himself, desperately yearning for a connection that transcended status and success. She challenged him, pushed him outside his comfort zone, introduced him to a world where value was measured not in dollars, but in emotion, creativity, and human connection. He, in turn, was utterly, completely smitten. He fell in love with a ferocity that surprised him, a depth of feeling he hadn't known he was capable of. He wanted to protect her from the harsh realities of his life, the constant scrutiny, the less than savory characters who often circled his world. But his attempts were often clumsy, born of a desire to control rather than a willingness to share vulnerability. The pressure of the Apollo Energy acquisition, a deal worth billions and fraught with political intrigue and powerful, unseen opposition, had pushed him to his limits. He had been operating on minimal sleep, stress compounding his natural tendency towards control and suspicion. Their final argument, fueled by exhaustion, misunderstanding, and his own deep-seated fears of being truly seen and accepted, had been a brutal, soul-bearing clash. He had lashed out, saying things he instantly regretted, questioning her understanding of the sacrifices his success demanded, doubting her ability to cope with the pressures of his life, implying a fragility that deeply offended her independent spirit. He saw the shock, the pain, and then a chilling resignation settle in her eyes. And then she was gone, not just from his apartment, but from his life, leaving behind only a void and a million unanswered questions that echoed in the cavernous space of his success. He had searched, his initial frantic desperation quickly hardening into a grim, relentless determination. He had deployed all his resources, his network of contacts, but Alara had vanished with an unnerving efficiency. It was as if she had been a ghost, leaving no trace, no forwarding address, no contact number. Her apartment, once so full of life and color, was empty, scrubbed clean of any hint of her presence. Her phone disconnected, her online presence meticulously erased. It was as if she had simply ceased to exist, a beautiful dream that had evaporated upon waking, leaving him with a crushing sense of loss and bewilderment. The pain had been a constant, dull ache beneath his ribs, a physical manifestation of the void she had left. He had buried himself in work, expanding his empire with a ferocity that left little room for thought or feeling, using the relentless pursuit of success as an anesthetic against the agonizing grief. He told himself she had found peace, found happiness, found a simpler life, found someone who could offer her what he, with his complicated, dangerous world, never could. It was a necessary self-deception, a psychological defense mechanism against the unbearable truth that he had, perhaps, destroyed the best part of himself when he drove her away. Tonight, the gilded doors of the Metropolitan Museum of Art were open for the annual Sterling Global Foundation Gala, an event he hosted to showcase his philanthropic endeavors and reinforce his image as a benefactor of the arts. He moved through the opulent halls, a figure of practiced charm and effortless authority, shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries, his mind a million miles away. Dressed in a custom-tailored tuxedo, he felt like an actor playing a well-rehearsed role, the performance flawless, the underlying emptiness profound. Roberts, his discreet and loyal chauffeur of 15 years, navigated the notoriously difficult evening traffic of the Upper East Side, his silent presence a comforting constant in Alexander's otherwise solitary existence. Alexander stared out the tinted window, his gaze sweeping over the endless stream of faces on the street, each with their own story, their own destination, a million lives he would never touch. And then, amidst the organized chaos of a street fair spilling onto the sidewalk near the museum district, he saw her. It was a fleeting glimpse, a fraction of a second that stretched into an eternity. A flash of dark hair against the backdrop of colorful stalls and hurried pedestrians. A familiar posture as she bent down, her attention focused on someone small beside her. His breath hitched in his throat, sharp and sudden, cutting through the polite hum of conversation in the car. "Alara, here? Now?" His heart, a muscle usually kept under strict control, hammered against his ribs, a frantic drum against the silence. "Stop the car, Roberts," he ordered, his voice tight with a sudden, urgent intensity that startled the driver. The limousine, a symbol of his unassailable status, pulled over abruptly, drawing immediate, curious stares from the passers-by. Alexander didn't care about appearances, about the disruption, about the curious eyes now fixed on his vehicle. He had to be sure. He pushed open the heavy door himself, the cool evening air hitting his face like a shock, and stepped out onto the bustling sidewalk, the energy of the city a tangible force. He moved through the small crowd, gathering near a vendor selling roasted nuts, his eyes fixed on the spot where he'd seen her. The air was thick with a mingled sense of street food, exhaust fumes, and the perfume of 1,000 strangers. And there she was, unmistakably Alara. She looked different. Older, certainly, with subtle lines of tiredness etched around her eyes, a certain weariness in her posture, but her familiar grace, the way she held her head, the curve of her back, was still there. She was laughing, a sound he hadn't realized he was starving to hear, a genuine, heartfelt sound, as she helped a small child adjust the strap of his backpack. A boy. He was small, no more than 5 years old, with a riot of messy brown hair that caught the fading light like a scattered halo. He was wearing a brightly colored jacket, clutching a blue balloon that tugged precariously at his small hand. He giggled at something Alara said, a pure, joyful sound that resonated deep within Alexander. Then, the boy tilted his head slightly, looking up at Alara, his small face alight with innocent joy. And in that moment, their profiles aligned. The curve of his cheek, the shape of his nose, the slight stubborn set of his chin. It was like looking at a reflection of himself, seen through the softening, innocent lens of childhood. Alexander froze, rooted to the spot amidst the swirling chaos of the street fair, the noise of the city fading to a distant murmur. The blue balloon seemed to pulse against the twilight sky, a beacon drawing his gaze back to the boy's eyes. They were his eyes, the same deep hazel, flecked with gold, wide and filled with a boundless curiosity that was startlingly familiar. Moved on? The carefully constructed lie he had lived with for 5 years, the shield he had used to protect himself from the pain, shattered into a million pieces, revealing a truth that was both terrifying and profoundly, breathtakingly hopeful. A child, her child, and the undeniable, gut-wrenching certainty that slammed into him, stealing his breath, leaving him reeling. This child, this vibrant, laughing boy, was his son. 5 years. The timeline aligned with a brutal, devastating precision. He watched them, unseen, unheard, a statue amidst the moving stream of humanity. Alara finished adjusting the backpack strap, ruffled the boy's messy hair, a gesture of such simple, profound tenderness that it sent a jolt through Alexander, a yearning for a connection he hadn't known he craved with such intensity. She took the boy's hand, and they began to walk away, towards the quieter side street that led away from the heart of the street fair. The boy looked back once more, just a fleeting glance over his shoulder, his large, hazel eyes meeting Alexander's across the short distance for a single, breathtaking second before Alara gently guided him forward. And they were gone, swallowed by the crowd and the gathering darkness. When Alexander finally moved, his limbs felt heavy, disconnected, as if he had been standing there for an eternity. Roberts was at his side, a look of deep concern on his face. "Mr. Sterling? Are you all right? You look unwell." "Yes, Roberts." Alexander managed, his voice hoarse, unfamiliar even to his own ears. He forced himself to take a steadying breath. "Just a moment. The gala. We should go." He got back into the car, the luxurious interior feeling suddenly cold and sterile, the scent of expensive leather cloying. The gala was irrelevant. The carefully controlled world of Alexander Sterling, built on logic and steel, had just been profoundly, irrevocably altered. He had a son he knew nothing about, a son who had been living just miles away for 5 years while Alexander existed in a self-imposed vacuum of grief and regret. The gala was a blur of forced smiles, polite conversation, and the clinking of champagne glasses. Alexander moved through the opulent room like a ghost, his mind replaying the fleeting image of Alara and the boy, his son. Every conversation felt meaningless, every smile a lie. He left early, citing a sudden illness, his carefully cultivated composure threatening to crumble under the weight of the revelation. Back in the silent, echoing expanse of his penthouse, sleep was an impossibility. He paced the marble floors, the city lights twinkling outside like indifferent eyes, mocking him with their distant sparkle. Joy, fierce and overwhelming, surged through him at the thought of Leo, his son, his flesh and blood. But it warred with a burning, almost unbearable anger towards Alara. How could she keep his child a secret for 5 years? How could she deny him the knowledge, the presence, the joy of his own son? But beneath the anger was a gnawing curiosity, a deep-seated suspicion that her disappearance was about more than just their argument. Her total vanishing act, the life seemingly lived off the grid, it didn't fit the Alara he knew. Why had she hidden? Who was she running from? Was the threat that drove her away 5 years ago still active, still looming over their lives? The thriller he had vaguely suspected in his own mind, a dramatic narrative of personal heartbreak, was beginning to take on a chilling, tangible reality. He needed answers, and he needed them immediately, with a desperation that superseded everything else. Before the first hint of dawn touched the sky, casting long shadows across the city, he was in his office, on a secure line with Marcus Thorne. Marcus was more than just a security chief. He was a former CIA operative with a network that spanned the globe, a man utterly discreet, ruthlessly efficient, and fiercely loyal. Alexander laid out the facts, his voice tight, controlled, betraying none of the emotional chaos raging within him. "I saw her, Marcus. Alara Vance. Last night, near the park. And she was with a child. A boy about 5 years old. I believe. I know he's my son." He looked Marcus directly in the eye, his gaze intense. "Find them. Immediately. Discreetly. I need to know everything about her life since she disappeared. Every address, every job, every contact, every interaction. And absolute secrecy is paramount. This information does not leave this operation. No one, absolutely no one outside of this team, is to know about this. Marcus's expression remained impassive, a skill honed by years in the shadows of intelligence work. Understood, Mr. Sterling. We will mobilize immediately. Consider it our top priority. Within hours, the formidable resources of Sterling Global's intelligence apparatus were directed towards one single, urgent goal: uncovering the life of Alara Vance since her disappearance. A team of seasoned private investigators, forensic analysts, digital trackers, and human intelligence gatherers were put on the case, working around the clock under Marcus Thorne's direct supervision. The initial reports confirmed Alexander's observation: a boy approximately 5 years old, named Leo. His birth certificate, obtained discreetly through a secure channel, listed only Alara Vance as the parent. The space for the father's name was conspicuously blank. The absence was a raw, painful wound, a stark confirmation of the secret she had kept. The investigation into Alara's life after she left revealed a pattern of movement that was anything but stable or settled. After leaving New York, she had briefly stayed with a distant relative in a small, isolated town in rural Pennsylvania, working odd jobs for cash. Then, she had moved to Chicago, taking on temporary work as a gallery assistant. From Chicago, she had relocated to a small town in New England, finding employment in a local bookstore while pursuing freelance graphic design work on the side. She never stayed in one place for longer than a year or 18 months, rarely used credit cards, preferring cash transactions whenever possible, and her online presence was minimal to non-existent. Email addresses were changed frequently, social media accounts were either deleted or never created, and phone numbers were burner phones, used briefly and then discarded. It was a life lived deliberately below the radar, a constant state of transition, almost as if she were actively trying to remain hidden, to be untraceable. The financial records, sparse as they were, painted a picture of a life lived frugally, often struggling to make ends meet. There were periods where her income was barely enough to cover basic expenses. She received no financial support from anyone, no family, no friends, certainly no unknown benefactor. She was doing this alone, building a life for herself, and Leo through sheer determination and hard work. This realization, seeing the material challenges she had faced, the sacrifices she had undoubtedly made while raising his son, added another complex layer to Alexander's emotions. A profound sense of guilt for her struggles, a deep admiration for her resilience, and a burning, almost desperate need to understand why she had chosen this difficult path, why she had cut herself off completely. The investigation finally yielded a more stable, long-term location, an apartment in Brooklyn, a world away from the glittering towers and exclusive enclaves Alexander inhabited. It was a quiet, residential neighborhood of brownstones, tree-lined streets, and a strong sense of community. The reports included detailed surveillance photos and reports from discreet human intelligence on the ground. Alara walking Leo to the local public school, a sturdy brick building filled with the sounds of children's laughter. Alara carrying heavy grocery bags, her shoulders slumped with fatigue, but her gaze determined. Leo laughing on a swing in the local park. Alara pushing him higher, her face illuminated by maternal love so profound, so pure, that it stole Alexander's breath and brought an ache to his chest that was both painful and strangely hopeful. He saw her interacting with other parents at the school gate, exchanging pleasantries with neighbors on the stoop, navigating the daily challenges of life as a single mother with a quiet strength he hadn't fully appreciated before. And Leo was a whirlwind of energy, a bright, curious child, quick to laugh, clutching Alara's hand with an almost fierce affection. Alexander watched him play, his heart aching with a mix of longing, regret, and a fierce, protective instinct that surged through him with an intensity he had never experienced. He saw echoes of himself in Leo's mannerisms, In the way he tilted his head when he was concentrating on something, the slight stubborn set of his jaw when he was determined to figure something out, the way he moved with a quick, decisive energy. Leo was undeniably, profoundly his son. The gnawing question of why she had disappeared and kept Leo a secret consumed him. The investigators, after extensive surveillance and background checks, found no immediate evidence of overt danger in Brooklyn. There were no obvious signs of being followed, no known threats in her current life. But the pattern of her previous movements, her extreme privacy measures, couldn't be ignored. Was she still afraid? Was the threat that drove her away 5 years ago still active, still looming over their lives? The thriller he had vaguely suspected in his own mind, a dramatic narrative of personal heartbreak and a woman trying to escape her past, was becoming a chilling, tangible reality, with the stakes higher than he could have imagined. He knew he couldn't wait forever, living on surveillance reports and grainy photographs. The need to understand the full truth directly from Alara and the growing, overwhelming fear for their safety compelled him to act. He needed to speak with her, to hear the story from her own lips, to understand the depth of the danger she had faced. He chose a late afternoon, a day he knew Leo had an after-school activity, hoping to catch Alara alone or with minimal interruption, in a setting that offered a degree of privacy, if not complete security. He found her outside the local community center where Leo had a drawing class. The street was quieter than the bustling schoolyard, but still had a steady flow of neighborhood residents and parents picking up their children. He parked his car down the block, instructing Roberts to wait, and walked towards her, his heart pounding with a mixture of apprehension, determination, and a profound sense of unreality. Alara. His voice, though kept deliberately low, was distinct in the late afternoon air, cutting through the ambient sounds of distant traffic and children's voices. She froze instantly, her body tensing, every muscle rigid with shock. She turned slowly, her face draining of color, her eyes widening in disbelief and a flicker of something that looked like pure, unadulterated panic. "Alexander," she whispered, the name barely audible, a fragile sound on the air. He stood before her, a figure of immense presence and power in his world, yet feeling utterly exposed, vulnerable, a man stripped bare by the weight of this moment. His gaze swept over her face, seeing the lines of tiredness, the lingering fear that seemed to always reside in her eyes, and the shock of seeing him here, now. "We need to talk, Alara," he said, his voice urgent, kept low enough not to attract undue attention from the few people nearby. "About Leo. About why you left. About everything." Her eyes darted nervously around the street, her body language tense, ready to bolt like a cornered animal. She hugged her arms instinctively, her gaze flickering towards the doors of the community center. "Not here, Alexander. Please. It's not safe. You shouldn't be here." "Not safe?" he pressed, the words confirming his deepest fears, adding another layer to the chilling puzzle. "Why isn't it safe, Alara? What are you afraid of?" She hesitated, biting her lip, clearly torn between the need for discretion and the overwhelming shock of his sudden appearance. Before she could answer, the double doors of the community center opened, and children began to spill out into the late afternoon light, a cheerful cascade of energy and sound. Leo was among them, his small face alight with the pride of a new drawing clutched carefully in his hand. He saw Alara waiting, and his face broke into a wide, happy grin as he ran towards her, his small legs pumping, his messy brown hair bouncing. Alara's expression shifted instantly, the fear in her eyes momentarily masked by a forced calm, a protective shield she instinctively raised. She knelt down as Leo reached her, wrapping her arms around him, pulling him close, shielding him slightly with her body, her eyes meeting Alexander's over the top of Leo's head, a look of fierce, unwavering protectiveness mixed with a desperate plea for discretion. Leo, chattering excitedly about his drawing, oblivious to the tension radiating between the two adults, glanced at Alexander, his brow furrowed with mild curiosity at the presence of this tall stranger who was talking to his mommy. Alara offered Alexander a strained, polite smile that didn't reach her eyes, the kind of smile one offers a stranger one has been introduced to briefly at a party. It was a clear signal to play along, to maintain the facade of unfamiliarity. Alexander understood. This was not the time, not the place for this earth-shattering conversation. The presence of Leo, the potential for danger, necessitated a different approach. "Perhaps another time, then," Alexander said, his voice adopting a tone of polite, though slightly awkward, encounter, playing the role she had implicitly assigned him. "It was unexpected, seeing you." Alara nodded curtly, her grip on Leo's hand tightening slightly. "Yes, unexpected. My apartment," Alexander said, his voice low, decisive, his gaze holding hers, cutting through the pretense of polite conversation. "Tonight, after he's asleep. 9 o'clock. I need to understand, Alara." She hesitated for a moment longer, weighing the risks, the necessity of finally revealing the truth, the potential consequences. The urgency in his eyes, the unwavering determination in his voice, told her he would not be deterred. Finally, she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. 9 o'clock. "I'll be there," he confirmed, his gaze holding hers, a silent promise of his arrival and an unspoken demand for the truth that had been hidden for 5 long years. He stepped back, allowing her space, and watched as she stood up, taking Leo's hand, his son still chattering about his drawing. Alara offered Alexander another strained, polite smile, a thin veneer over the fear in her eyes. Then she gently guided Leo away, melting into the stream of parents and children dispersing from the community center, leaving Alexander standing alone on the sidewalk, the weight of his son's existence and the chilling certainty of the danger surrounding them pressing down on him, a heavy, suffocating cloak. The encounter, brief and public, had only deepened the mystery and intensified the fear. Who was they? How deep did the threat run? And why had Alara chosen to face it alone? The wait until 9 o'clock was an agonizing torment. Alexander returned to his office, the familiar symbols of his power and control now feeling hollow and inadequate. The sheer vulnerability of Alara and Leo, the realization that they had been living under a constant threat directly linked to him and his world, filled him with a protective rage he had never experienced before. He couldn't concentrate on work, couldn't focus on anything other than the image of Leo's face, Alara's fear, and the burning question of who had threatened them and why. He spent the intervening hours with Marcus Thorne, reviewing every detail of the ongoing investigation into the collector and his network. The pieces were starting to come together, painting a disturbing picture of a ruthless individual, Elias Thorne, who operated with impunity, using intimidation and violence to protect his illicit financial empire. The anonymous threats Alara received 5 years ago, the deliberate measures she took to disappear, the pattern of her movements. It all fit the collector's modus operandi perfectly. He had targeted Alara, his known vulnerability, to cripple him professionally and personally, likely as a strategic move to disrupt the Apollo Energy acquisition. Marcus's team had uncovered chilling details about Thorne's network, his connections to organized crime, his use of sophisticated surveillance technology, his ability to compromise individuals and systems. The realization that this threat was not just a ghost from the past, but a real, active danger, sent a shiver down Alexander's spine. The seemingly innocent street fair encounter, the drawing class, the Brooklyn apartment, they were all potential targets. At 9 o'clock precisely, Alexander stood on the third-floor landing outside Alara's apartment in Brooklyn, the quiet residential building a stark contrast to the heavily secured environment he usually inhabited. He took a deep breath, attempting to compose himself, pushing down the roiling mix of apprehension, anger, and hope. He raised his hand and knocked. Alara opened the door, her face pale, but her gaze steady, resolute. The apartment was quiet, dimly lit, the comforting scent of a child's bedtime, perhaps residual warmth from a bath, the faint smell of children's toothpaste, filling the air. Toys were neatly stacked in a corner. A colorful drawing was taped proudly to the refrigerator. Small shoes were lined up neatly by the door, tangible reminders of the life she had built here. a life he knew nothing about. She led him into the small living room, a space that felt intimate and real, a stark contrast to the sterile opulence of his own world. It was a home built with love and resilience, a sanctuary she had created in the face of fear. They sat across from each other on mismatched chairs, a small coffee table between them, the silence stretching, thick with the weight of 5 years of unshared lives, of pain, of unanswered questions. The only sounds were the distant hum of the city outside and the faint, rhythmic breathing coming from the closed door of Leo's bedroom. "He's asleep," Elara said softly, breaking the silence, her voice quiet, a little tired. "Thank you for seeing me, Elara," Alexander said, his voice low, stripped of its usual boardroom authority, raw with emotion. "For agreeing to talk. I saw him yesterday, on the street. I had to be sure." She met his gaze, her eyes filled with a deep sadness, an acceptance of the inevitable. "You saw him, Alexander. It was bound to happen eventually, I suppose. I tried to stay hidden. I saw him," he confirmed again, the image of Leo's face, his eyes, filling his mind, a constant, vivid presence. He's my son, isn't he?" "Yes," she said again, her voice barely above a whisper, the confirmation hitting him anew with its profound, life-altering weight. "He's your son, Alexander." Alexander closed his eyes for a brief moment, absorbing the truth, the overwhelming reality of it. He had a son he had missed for 5 years. 5 years of his life, of Leo's life gone. When he opened his eyes, his gaze was intense, searching hers, demanding answers. "Why, Elara? Why keep him from me? Why disappear completely? How could you do that?" She took a deep, shaky breath, her hands twisting in her lap, her gaze dropping to her fingers. "It wasn't simple, Alexander. Not simple at all. It wasn't about you, not entirely. Not about not wanting you to know. After our argument, I was devastated. I felt like I had failed, like I didn't belong in your world, like I was just collateral damage in your life, something easily broken and discarded when the pressure was too high." She paused, her voice trembling slightly. "And then I found out I was pregnant." He listened intently, his heart aching for the young woman who had faced this alone, convinced she had no one to turn to, no one to rely on. He remembered the raw pain in her eyes that last night, the words he had hurled at her in his own stress-fueled misery, words he instantly regretted but couldn't take back. He saw now how those words, coupled with the shock of the pregnancy, must have landed on her. "I didn't know what to do," she continued, her voice gaining a fragile strength as she spoke, reliving the difficult memories. "I was alone, scared, and facing motherhood on my own. I saw how your life was, Alexander. The constant pressure, the relentless demands, the lack of privacy, the inherent dangers of the world you inhabited. I couldn't imagine bringing a child into that. Not after our argument. Not with the uncertainty between us. I honestly thought it would be a burden to you. That you wouldn't want the responsibility, the complication of a child, given the complexities of your life." "A complication," he repeated, his voice rising slightly, a mix of pain, disbelief, and a growing anger at the misconception she had carried. "Elara, he's my son. My son. How could you think I wouldn't want him? How could you possibly believe that? And how could you keep him from me for 5 years?" "Because it wasn't safe, Alexander," she countered, her voice rising as well, though still hushed, a desperate edge to it, the fear from the street encounter returning to her eyes. "It wasn't safe for him. It wasn't safe for us. That's why I disappeared. That's why I kept him a secret." He stared at her, the confirmation of his deepest fears chilling him to the bone, sending a cold dread through him. The investigator's suspicions, Marcus's analysis, it was all true. "Safe from what, Elara? Who were you afraid of? Tell me everything." She hesitated, her eyes darting nervously around the room, as if checking for unseen listeners, for hidden microphones. The fear was still palpable, a constant companion. "From your world, Alexander. From the people in it. They contacted me after I left your place that night. They knew who I was, knew I was involved with you, knew I was hurting. They said they knew about the baby. that they had been watching you, watching me. Her voice dropped to a near whisper, thick with remembered terror, her eyes wide and haunted. They were anonymous, untraceable calls, messages from burner phones, emails that couldn't be traced. They said if I didn't disappear completely, if I didn't break all ties with you, never try to contact you again, and never reveal the child to you, they would ensure your Apollo Energy deal failed. And they said they would hurt you. And they threatened me and the baby directly. They knew details about my life, Alexander. Things I had only told you, or maybe one or two closest friends. They described my apartment, my routine. They sent me photos, grainy photos, proving they were following me, watching my building. Alexander felt a cold dread spread through him, a sickening confirmation of the depravity he had suspected. Elias Thorne. This was precisely the kind of ruthless, personal attack Thorne was known for. They had targeted Alara, his known vulnerability, her pregnancy, to cripple him professionally and personally, to gain leverage in a multi-billion-dollar deal. They said if I ever tried to contact you, if you ever found me, if I ever revealed Leo's existence to you, they would make good on their threats, she continued, her voice trembling again, raw with the fear she had carried alone for so long. They said they would destroy Sterling Global, take everything from you, ruin your reputation. And they said they would make sure they said the baby wouldn't survive, that they would take him away from me, or worse. Alexander stood up slowly, unable to sit still, the small apartment feeling suddenly claustrophobic, exposed, the quiet street outside seeming less peaceful and more menacing. He walked to the window, looking out at the darkened street below, seeing it now through the lens of potential danger, seeing the shadows where unseen threats might lurk. They had used her love for him, her vulnerability, her pregnancy, her isolation as a weapon. It was a level of cruelty that was almost unimaginable, a testament to the ruthless lengths some people would go to for power and money. You believe them, he stated, his voice low and rough with emotion, not a question, but a painful understanding of the impossible position she had been put in. I was young, Alexander, barely finished with art school, and alone, and pregnant, and someone was threatening the lives of the two people I cared about most in the world, she cried out softly, standing up to face him, her voice filled with the desperation of past helplessness. They made it terrifyingly real. They knew things they shouldn't have known. They had proof they were watching me. I had no idea how far their reach extended, who they were connected to. Leaving felt like the only way to protect you. To protect Leo. It was a desperate choice, a sacrifice I made believing it was the only way to keep you both safe. He turned back to her, his heart aching with the weight of the fear she had carried alone for 5 long years, the unimaginable burden she had borne in silence. You shouldn't have had to face that alone, Alara. You should have come to me. We could have fought them together. How, Alexander, she challenged, her voice filled with the frustration of past helplessness, of feeling powerless against unseen enemies. With what? I had no names, no faces, no concrete evidence other than anonymous threats and proof they were watching me. I had no idea if they were connected to people inside your own company, people you trusted. I convinced myself that if I vanished, if I removed myself as your known weakness, they would leave you alone, that you were safer without me in your life, without the knowledge of Leo's existence being a liability. He walked towards her slowly, closing the small distance between them, reaching out to take her hands, his fingers intertwining with hers, a silent promise of support and protection. Alara. She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes, finally allowing the dam to break. Tears streamed down her face, silent and heavy, wetting his shirt. She was trembling, the residue of 5 years of fear, isolation, and the immense burden she had carried alone. It was so hard, Alexander, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. So incredibly hard. Raising Leo alone, constantly looking over my shoulder, always afraid they would find us, that I hadn't been careful enough, that I had somehow put him in danger just by existing. Every time we moved, every time I started a new job, The fear was always there, a cold knot in my stomach. But then I would look at Leo, see his face, his innocent joy, his boundless energy, and know that I had done it for him. That he was safe because I had left, because I had kept him hidden. He pulled her gently into his arms, holding her tightly, his chin resting on her hair. He could feel her trembling, the weight of the years of fear, isolation, and the immense burden she had carried alone. "You were so incredibly brave, Ilara," he whispered into her hair, his voice thick with emotion. "More brave than I could have imagined. You faced down your fear, alone, to protect our son." They stood there for a long time, holding each other, the years of separation melting away in the shared understanding of the terrible circumstances that had driven them apart, the immense sacrifice she had made. The pain was still present, the regret for the lost years, the acknowledging of the trauma they had both endured, albeit in different ways. But beneath the pain, a fragile hope began to stir, a sense of reconnection, a powerful bond that had survived separation, fear, and unimaginable pressure. In that moment, holding Ilara, knowing Leo was asleep in the next room, Alexander felt a sense of purpose and belonging that transcended all his wealth and power. Over the following weeks and months, Alexander dedicated the full force of Sterling Global's formidable resources and his own relentless determination to dismantling Elias Thorne's network. Marcus Thorne, a man whose calm exterior hid a steel core and a brilliant strategic mind, led the investigation with unwavering focus. He assembled a team of top-tier professionals from various fields, former intelligence operatives specializing in counter-surveillance and infiltration, financial forensic experts capable of following the most convoluted money laundering trails, cybersecurity specialists who could penetrate even the most sophisticated digital defenses, and legal strategists experienced in prosecuting complex white-collar and organized crimes. The investigation was a deep dive into the darkest corners of the financial world, a complex puzzle with pieces scattered across continents. They uncovered a vast, interconnected web of illegal activities, including large-scale insider trading, multinational money laundering schemes, sophisticated blackmail operations targeting key figures in government and industry, and a chilling history of using intimidation and violence to silence opposition and eliminate threats. Elias Thorne wasn't just a corporate raider. He was the head of a sophisticated criminal enterprise that used legitimate businesses as a front for illicit operations, operating with impunity and ruthlessness. The danger, they quickly realized, was not confined to the past. It was immediate, pervasive, and escalating. As Alexander's team closed in on Elias Thorne, meticulously gathering evidence and identifying key players in his network, the retaliation became more aggressive and frequent. The anonymous threats against Ilara and Leo increased in volume and severity, now often containing chillingly specific details about Leo's routines or the secure property, proving that Thorne's reach extended further than they initially anticipated. These threats were designed to intimidate Alexander, to force him to back down. They were accompanied by more overt signs of surveillance. Cars parked on streets near the Brooklyn apartment for extended periods. Individuals observed loitering near places Ilara and Leo frequented before moving to the secure location. Suspicious activity online targeting people connected to Ilara's past life. The subtle acts of intimidation escalated to more direct actions. There was a small fire set in the hallway of Ilara's old apartment building, quickly extinguished but clearly an act of arson intended as a message. A series of online attacks targeted Alexander's personal digital accounts and those of key Sterling Global executives, attempting to steal sensitive information or plant malware. The incident that truly brought the danger home with terrifying clarity was a carefully orchestrated accident targeting Ilara and Leo. As Ilara was leaving the grocery store with Leo one afternoon, during a brief, approved outing with a security detail, a large delivery truck ran a red light and narrowly missed hitting her car by mere inches. The timing was too precise, the circumstances too deliberate to be a coincidence. Marcus's team quickly determined the truck had been stolen hours earlier and deliberately positioned to intersect Alara's path at that exact moment. It was a chillingly clear message from Thorne. Back off, or the threats would become reality. This near-fatal incident pushed Alexander to the brink. The stakes were no longer just financial or professional. They were deeply, terrifyingly personal. His son, the woman he loved, had almost been killed because of his world, because of his enemies. He immediately escalated security measures to an unprecedented level. He insisted Alara and Leo permanently relocate from the Brooklyn apartment, which was now clearly compromised, to one of Sterling Global's most secure properties, a sprawling, fortified estate in a secluded area outside the city. It was a veritable fortress, equipped with state-of-the-art surveillance systems, reinforced structures, panic rooms, and staffed with a large, highly trained, rotating security detail led personally by Marcus Thorne. It was a beautiful property, surrounded by acres of private land, with sprawling gardens and a large pool, but it felt to Alara like a gilded cage, a constant, suffocating reminder that they were living under a very real, very present threat. She struggled with the loss of her independence, the constant presence of armed guards, the feeling of being a prisoner, albeit a protected one. Alexander understood her frustration, her yearning for normalcy, her feeling of being trapped, but he knew, with chilling certainty, that their safety was his absolute priority, overriding all other concerns. He worked closely with the security team to make the environment as comfortable and as close to normal as possible for Leo, creating play areas, ensuring he had access to educational materials, and arranging for supervised playdates with the children of the security staff or with a specially arranged playmate. Living together under these high-stress, highly secured circumstances forced Alexander and Alara to confront their past and navigate their present in a confined, intense environment. The initial days at the estate were tense, filled with the awkwardness of two people who had once been intimately connected but were now separated by years of unshared experiences, profound trauma, and a constant undercurrent of fear. They spent hours talking, often late into the night after Leo was asleep, revisiting every painful memory, every misunderstanding, every unspoken fear. They talked about their relationship, the pressures that had contributed to their breakup, the terrible circumstances that had forced Alara into hiding, the emotional toll it had taken on both of them. It was an emotionally exhausting process, filled with tears, moments of anger, and hesitant steps towards forgiveness. They sought professional help, attending therapy sessions with a trauma-informed therapist, both individually and together, to process the trauma of the past 5 years, to understand the complex dynamics of their past relationship, and to build a healthier foundation for their relationship and their family moving forward. The therapist helped them navigate the complex emotional landscape, providing tools to communicate more effectively, to build trust after years of secrecy and separation, and to heal the deep wounds they both carried. Alara worked through her feelings of betrayal and hurt from their breakup, and the lingering fear from the threats. Alexander grappled with the guilt of his past insensitivities, the realization of the danger his world had brought upon them, and his own deep-seated fears of vulnerability and loss. Alexander dedicated himself to being a father to Leo, a role he embraced with a fierce, protective love that surprised even himself. He adjusted his schedule drastically, prioritizing time with his son above all else. He carved out hours each day from his relentless work schedule, leaving the towering corporate world behind to fully enter the smaller, more vibrant, and infinitely more important world of his son. He learned Leo's favorite cartoon characters, his preferred bedtime stories, the way he liked his toast cut, the games that made him giggle uncontrollably. He spent hours playing with him in the sprawling gardens of the estate, building elaborate Lego castles in the playroom, reading to him in quiet corners. He attended every one of Leo's limited activities at the secure property, structured play sessions, educational tutoring, supervised playdates. Watching him interact with others, his heart swelling with a protective pride he had never known. Leo, initially shy and somewhat wary of this imposing man who was suddenly a constant presence in his life, slowly opened up, responding to Alexander's unwavering attention, his gentle persistence, and his genuine affection. He began to seek out Alexander, climbing into his lap during story time, reaching for his hand during walks around the secure grounds, asking for Daddy Alex when Alexander was on a video call or in a meeting. The bond between them grew, a powerful, undeniable connection that filled the void in Alexander's life and brought a warmth he hadn't felt in years. The thriller element was a constant, pervasive undercurrent to their lives at the secure estate. Even within the heavily fortified walls, the sense of being watched, of potential danger lurking just beyond the perimeter, was ever present. Elias Thorne, cornered and increasingly desperate as Alexander's team tightened the net around him, continued to strike out. There was a brazen attempt to infiltrate the estate, a complex plan involving compromising a service provider. But it was thwarted by the swift and efficient response of Marcus's highly trained security team, resulting in a tense standoff and the apprehension of Thorne's operatives. The incident served as a chilling reminder that Thorne would stop at nothing to silence Alexander and protect his empire, and that their security, while robust, was not absolute. Alexander, working closely with Marcus and the federal agencies, felt the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. He was not just protecting Sterling Global anymore. He was protecting his family, the most precious thing in his life, from a truly dangerous individual. In parallel with the direct threat from Thorne, Alexander also faced significant challenges within Sterling Global itself. Thorne's attempts to manipulate the markets, spread damaging rumors about Alexander's personal life and the investigation, and orchestrate targeted cyber attacks, combined with the disruption caused by the ongoing investigation and the necessary security measures, led to a period of significant instability for the company. Rivals attempted to exploit the situation, sensing weakness at the top. Alexander had to fight on two fronts, defending his family from a dangerous criminal and defending his empire from opportunistic competitors. He spent hours each day on secure video calls, managing crises, reassuring investors, strategizing with his executive team, all while remaining physically present at the secure estate, juggling the roles of CEO and father under immense pressure. The business subplot became deeply intertwined with the personal danger, highlighting how Thorne's ruthlessness extended into every facet of Alexander's life. The investigation into Elias Thorne's network intensified, delving deeper into his international connections, his complex financial structures, and his history of violence. Marcus's team worked tirelessly, following every lead, piecing together the intricate puzzle of Thorne's criminal enterprise. They identified key players in Thorne's organization, a network of corrupt officials, skilled hackers, ruthless enforcers, complicit financial institutions, and individuals who had been blackmailed or intimidated into cooperating. They uncovered evidence of other crimes Thorne had committed, other lives he had ruined, painting a comprehensive picture of a truly dangerous and depraved individual who operated with impunity. The climax of their long ordeal arrived after months of painstaking investigative work, living under constant threat and navigating the complexities of their rekindled family life. Marcus and his team, working in close coordination with multiple federal agencies, the FBI, the Secret Service, and international law enforcement partners, finally gathered irrefutable, damning evidence linking Elias Thorne directly to the threats against Alara and Leo, the attempt to derail the Apollo Energy deal, and a vast array of other criminal activities, including murder-for-hire plots. Federal indictments were handed down in multiple jurisdictions, both domestically and internationally, outlining the full scope of Thorne's criminal enterprise. A large-scale, coordinated operation was launched to apprehend Thorne and his key associates simultaneously across several states and internationally, a complex logistical and strategic undertaking involving hundreds of law enforcement personnel. The night of the raids was the longest of Alexander's life. He remained at the secure estate with Alara and Leo, surrounded by the quiet, professional presence of his security team. Alara stayed by his side, her hand in his, their shared anxiety a palpable force in the heavily secured room. They had prepared for this night, going over every potential scenario with Marcus. Leo, thankfully, slept soundly in his room, oblivious to the dramatic events unfolding that would finally, hopefully, free them from the shadow of fear that had loomed over their lives for so long. They monitored the progress of the raids via a secure video feed and encrypted communication channels, watching the strategic movements of law enforcement teams closing in on Thorne's various known locations: luxury apartments, offshore offices, private estates. Hours crawled by, each minute an eternity, filled with hushed updates from Marcus and the tense silence of waiting. Finally, as the first hint of dawn began to paint the sky outside, casting a pale light over the estate grounds, the message came through. Elias Thorne was in custody. He had been apprehended at a private airfield as he attempted to flee the country in his private jet. His key lieutenants and numerous other members of his network had also been apprehended in coordinated raids across the globe. The vast criminal enterprise was being dismantled brick by painstaking brick. The threat, the pervasive, terrifying threat that had shaped their lives for 5 years, was over. A profound silence fell over the secure property, broken only by the soft sounds of Leo's breathing from the next room. A wave of exhaustion and overwhelming relief washed over Alexander and Alara, so powerful it left them weak, trembling. They held each other tightly, tears of gratitude, pain, and sheer exhaustion streaming down their faces. They had faced the darkness, endured the fear, and they had emerged together, stronger. The nightmare was finally over. The aftermath of Elias Thorne's arrest was a media firestorm that dominated headlines for weeks, then months. The scale of his criminal activities, the chilling details of the threats against Alexander Sterling and his family, the intersection of corporate power and organized crime. It captivated the public's attention. Alexander and Alara were thrust into the spotlight, navigating a relentless barrage of interviews, press conferences, and intense public scrutiny. Alara, with quiet strength and dignity, spoke about the fear she had lived with, the sacrifices she had made to protect her son, and the importance of standing up to intimidation and abuse of power. She became a reluctant public figure, admired for her resilience, her bravery, and her unwavering devotion to her child. Her story resonated with countless others who had faced intimidation or fear. Life at the secure estate continued for a while longer, allowing them to process the trauma, cooperate fully with the ongoing legal proceedings against Thorne and his network, and adjust to their new reality away from the immediate glare of the media. The legal battles were complex and protracted, stretching over months, with Thorne and his highly paid legal team attempting to evade justice through every legal maneuver possible. Alexander's legal team, working closely with the government prosecutors, meticulously presented the mountain of evidence compiled by Marcus's team, including Alara's powerful and courageous testimony, which was crucial in securing convictions. Elias Thorne and many of his key associates were eventually found guilty and sentenced to long prison terms, a measure of justice finally served. As the legal dust began to settle and the immediate threat dissipated, Alexander and Alara began the complex, delicate process of building a life together, one that blended their two very different worlds and acknowledged the trauma they had endured. Alara was still understandably wary of the high-profile nature of Alexander's life, the constant attention, the potential for future threats, even with Thorne in prison. Alexander understood her reservations completely. He had witnessed firsthand the danger his world could bring. They decided against returning to the high-profile existence of the Manhattan penthouse full-time. Instead, they purchased a beautiful, sprawling, and highly private estate in the countryside upstate, a place that offered not only enhanced security and seclusion, but also ample space for Leo to grow, explore, and have a semblance of a normal childhood, and for Alara to have a dedicated studio to return to her art, her passion, a vital part of her identity that had been suppressed for years by fear. It became their primary residence, their sanctuary, a place where they could build their family life away from the constant scrutiny of the city. Alexander also maintained a smaller, discreet, but still secure apartment in the city for when his work required him to be there, ensuring he could balance his professional life with his family commitments without compromising their safety or privacy. Alexander's priorities had undergone a fundamental, irreversible, and lasting shift. He was still a powerful figure in the business world, leading Sterling Global, but his focus was now firmly, undeniably on his family. He delegated more responsibilities at Sterling Global, empowering his executive team and creating a healthier work-life balance that allowed him to be fully present for Alara and Leo. He became a vocal advocate for victims of corporate crime, extortion, and intimidation, using his immense influence, resources, and personal story to support organizations that help those targeted by ruthless individuals like Elias Thorne. His public image began to evolve, softening from the image of a purely ruthless, solitary titan to one of a devoted father, a loving partner, and a man committed to using his power for good, a transformation that resonated deeply with the public. Alara, free from the constant shadow of fear, returned to her art with renewed passion, purpose, and a newfound depth. Her work, now infused with the raw emotion and resilience of her experiences, became deeply personal and incredibly powerful. She held successful exhibitions, her art resonating with audiences on a profound level, sharing her story not just through words but through color and form. She created a beautiful, dedicated studio at their new home, a space for healing and creativity. She became actively involved in local community initiatives, particularly those supporting single mothers, families who had faced adversity, and art therapy programs, building a community for herself and Leo outside of Alexander's world. Their relationship continued to grow and deepen, a testament to the enduring power of love, forgiveness, and resilience forged in the crucible of shared trauma. The scars of the past remained, the memories of fear, separation, and the pain they had caused each other. But they faced them together, communicating openly, supporting each other through the ongoing process of healing and rebuilding trust. It wasn't a flawless, effortless romance straight out of a fairy tale. It was real, complex, and built on a foundation of shared trauma, a deep understanding of each other's vulnerabilities and strengths, and an unwavering, absolute commitment to their family. They had difficult conversations, navigated moments of doubt, and sometimes struggled with the lingering shadows of the past, but they did so together, stronger for what they had endured. Leo thrived in their new life. He was a happy, well-adjusted child, secure in the love of both his parents, adapting remarkably well to the changes in his life. He adored his father, and the powerful, undeniable bond they had forged during the tense time at the secure estate only deepened with time, shared experiences, and the simple, everyday moments of family life. Bedtime stories, weekend outings, shared meals, learning to ride his bike with Alexander running alongside him, scraped knees and all. He never fully comprehended the darkness they had faced, the extent of the danger that had loomed over his young life. But he understood that he was loved deeply and unconditionally, that his family was strong, and that they were together, finally safe. The billionaire who thought she'd moved on had found her again, not just the vibrant artist he had loved years ago, but a stronger, more resilient woman who had faced down fear, endured unimaginable hardship, and built a life out of nothing to protect their son. And in finding her, he had found the son he never knew he had, the living embodiment of their intertwined past, their complex present, and their shared, hopeful future. Their journey had been long, fraught with pain, fear, separation, and a relentless pursuit of truth and justice. It had taken them through the darkest corners of corporate greed and the deepest vulnerabilities of the human heart. But it had led them back to each other, not unscathed, but stronger, more resilient, and with a family forged in the crucible of shared danger. Alexander Sterling had learned that the greatest wealth wasn't in the empires he built, the deals he closed, or the fortune he amassed, but in the quiet moments with his son, the unwavering love and strength of the woman by his side, and the enduring, unyielding truth that love, when faced with even the greatest threat, could not be extinguished. Their story was a testament to resilience, sacrifice, the power of truth, the long road to healing, and the unbreakable strength of family. Thank you for listening to this extensively expanded and detailed narrative. If you were captivated by Alexander and Alara's thrilling and emotional journey of love, loss, danger, and ultimately, redemption and family, please consider subscribing to our channel for more compelling stories.